Hey, what's up? Faizan here from ResearchBeast. On this channel, I share different tips and tricks for researchers, different motivational talks, and I also talk to experts about the research methods or anything related to research. So if you're interested in content like this, please consider subscribing to the channel.
Okay, I see that some of our Bulgarian colleagues are joining.
Hello. Nice to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity provided.
Thank you. Okay, so please, everybody, if you can mute your mics, that would help us a little bit. Also, I would say that those of you who are here, I am recording this session. Later, I'll upload it to YouTube. Thank you for joining here. It's just that we are having some issue with YouTube streaming server, so it's just not working. So we thought maybe we should go with Zoom. We can continue the session, and then later on, I'll upload it to YouTube for other people to watch. Okay, so this one is, this is a series that I've started recently because everybody is sort of at home. There's not a lot of support. The support system is all wrecked up, and people are, they are juggling between multiple jobs. So we have people working full-time, part-time, remotely, then kids are at home, spouses are at home, girlfriend, boyfriend, everybody is staying at home. And then, a huge chunk of people right now that I know, they are also fasting at this moment. So we have this Ramadan going on and people are fasting. So a lot of things are happening all together. And, when I talk to people, including my own sister who is studying for PhD, people are having issues with a lot of things, especially PhD students. They cannot find a lot of support. So I thought of, let's talk with some editors. Let's talk with people who deal with PhD students, who deal with research, and ask some questions. So I've advertised it for a couple of days. I've got some very interesting questions. Today we have Professor Stanislav Ivanov with us. He is from Bulgaria, actually. And Stan, please correct me. You are the rector for research at Varna
University of Management.
Right?
Exactly,
You're also
yes.
editor-in-chief for European Journal of Tourism Research. Stan and
Yes.
I are good friends, very good friends. In fact, Stan has helped me a lot with multiple videos on my channel. And also we work together on European Journal of Tourism. So now what we need to do is, today, Stan, I'll ask you some questions. But before we go into that, I would want you to please talk a little bit about what are you working on these days, like any specific research areas that you are working on, and also in a couple of sentences, how this COVID-19 has impacted you personally.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me to this talk. It's great honor. What I can say is that during the last 5-6 years, I've been working on the emerging field of robonomics, more specifically within the tourism context. I'm focusing on automation technologies and how these, and more specifically the economic side of automation technologies and their use in tourism context. And last year, based on this research interest, together with Craig Webster and a team of nearly 30 authors, we published one book with Emerald, which is robots, artificial intelligence, and service automation in travel, tourism, and hospitality. So this is what I was doing, and I continue to do for the last 5-6 years. How the pandemic is practically influencing me, I can only say that I was spending much time working from home. Now I spend probably 2 hours more working at home per day. So workload practically increased.
All right. So I guess everybody is pretty much in the same boat. I thought, like, in fact, a few days ago, somebody commented saying that, well, you should be happier because you're at home. It reduces your time to go to office and come back, which is like half an hour you go and half an hour you come back. But then when I look at myself, I have ended up working much more. And even though I think it's productive, but I really feel that the productivity has gone down because there's so much going on. I have 2 kids, we have to homeschool them. And then all the meetings are online. We are relying on technology. Normally, in my college, people think I'm pretty good at technology, but I'm struggling with it. Like this morning, I struggled with streaming on YouTube because it's just so much going on. In fact, this morning when I woke up, I saw something very interesting on YouTube where somebody was saying that I have to make a special to-do list only for keeping track of the webinars that I've registered for, because there are so many webinars going on. There's so much stuff going on that people register and then later they have to keep track on whether I'm attending them, not attending them. There are clashes between webinars. So I think that while there is a perception that staying at home is better, I think in reality, it increases your workload much more. Yesterday, there was an interesting article published on Harvard Business Review saying that on average, people are working 3 to 4 hours more compared to what they were working. Part of it is because the boundaries have blurred so much now. You know, you are at home, you don't know what's the time for home, what's the time for work and stuff like that. Okay, now we have all these different people right now. So if you have any questions, please make sure you post your questions in the chat window. I'll get to those questions as well. Right now, let's start with some questions that I've received from people when I advertise this thing, okay? All right, so let's start with some generic questions, okay? Stan, I got one question from some, this was from a PhD, I guess this was from a first year PhD student who said that if I'm working on a research, how would I know that the research I'm working on is worth?
Well, this is a very important question because the research should be worth, it should be important. Well, there are different ways to identify whether research is worth or not. First is if you are working on a topic which has been overly exploited and overly researched, and it is in a cluttered field, probably the contribution of the paper or the thesis will be very small, because there has been already a lot of work and many people are working on this as well. Of course, this does not mean that per se that the topic is not worth, because currently with COVID-19, we have hundreds of papers published every day. But this does not mean that the field is cluttered and new research is not worth. Also, if a topic is novel in terms of a topic, in terms of context, in terms of methodology, it will be worth from a theoretical point of view. But not only this, we need to consider not only the theoretical novelty of the topic, but also its practical contribution. Because knowledge has, because the university should not produce only theoretical knowledge, but also knowledge that could be used to improve society. So this contribution could be for policymakers, it could be for managers, it could be for any stakeholders in the society. So whether it is worth or not will depend on a more holistic perspective of the whole contribution of the paper.
Thank you, Stan. Yes, were you gonna add something to it?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Now, which makes a lot of sense. I think that, you know, right now, and I've also said it in the previous videos on the channel, even when I talk to some other editors, they say the same thing, that these days people are so much focused on theoretical work that they ignore the other things, right? So when we talk about worth of research, we need to think about who are the stakeholders, because it's not only the academics, but there are so many more stakeholders who can benefit from research. However, having said that, if you are trying to position your research towards, let's say, industry, then you need to make sure that your introduction chapter highlights that. Like whenever you are talking about the justification of research or research gaps, you need to focus on how is it a gap for industry. Only then that research would be worth for industry. So there should be a consistency between your introduction, your methods, and then your conclusions. So thank you again, Stan, for your take on this. Another very interesting question that is relevant to what we were discussing earlier about this COVID-19 and the workload and all that stuff. is how do we manage the work life, especially if you are a part-time PhD student, you are already working part-time, and then you are a full-time parent as well.
Well, that's very challenging, but not impossible. I can share that while I was a PhD student, I was also working. So I can speak from experience. My recommendation is to observe to look at the PhD as a project. This means that this project can be divided into different stages. Within each stage, different activities, and with each activity, different tasks. So the whole work that needs to be done during the PhD, like writing the PhD thesis, writing research papers based on the thesis, having classes or conference participation, all these things to be considered as to be broken down into different tasks, like small tasks, like which will require, let's say, 1 hour, 2 hours to complete. In that way, if you are a part-time PhD student, if you are working full-time, if you are a parent and you have small kids, obviously it will be very difficult to find a large block of time, let's say 1 full day, which you can dedicate on writing the thesis during the week. But you will be able to find time for 1-2 hours on different days. So this makes the whole PhD process more manageable. And at the end of the week, even if you have not found a lot of time, you will finish something, and this will give you a sense of satisfaction. Not only this, it's good if you have it's good your spouse to understand the importance of the PhD and what you are doing. And what I can say is that my wife was extremely supportive during my PhD studies, 2001, 2005. But also the supervisor needs to understand and to work with him or her. And probably another thing that is important, this is the PhD student should learn to say no. Not everything, not every commitment, not every obligation or every request that comes to the inbox of the PhD student should be transformed into a firm commitment. Because at the end of the day, a good PhD is finished PhD. Mm-hmm. So this needs to focus. So this is.
All right, Stan, I obviously all the stuff that you have said makes sense, but two things I would really, focus on here is, one is for PhD students to say no. This is very important. And I think how you can really facilitate saying no is by taking support from people around you. And most of the PhD students either have a lot of linkage with their supervisors or their family. So I think, both these ways, if you talk to them, it would make sense. I mean, I talk to many students who are struggling with their supervisor, mm-hmm. But then if I ask them, have you talked to your supervisor? They say no. So there's a lot of stuff where students are so scared of talking to their supervisors that they never talk to them. And I normally say that supervisors are also human beings. They've gone through it. Yes, sometimes unfortunately, some negative stuff come out of it. But most of the times, if you talk to your supervisors, they may understand your situation if you clearly and honestly explain to them about what is your situation and how you are struggling with stuff. The second one is talking to your family. Well, if you are married, obviously, then your spouse. If you are not married, then talking to your parents or anybody who you are living with, telling them that what you are going through and how your day is classified into different chunks, right? So talking to people around you is going to really help you a lot. So that is really some very good suggestion. Thank you, Stan. All right, now going to another question, which again is a very interesting question. Let's see. Okay, so there's a question in the chat which says that normally it's believed that review papers are normally accepted by senior researchers or those who are experienced or who have an expertise in a particular area, right? And normally based on editor's invitation. Is that true? If yes, why not accept a review paper from early researchers?
Well, I do not necessarily agree with this statement. I think that young researchers, they can also make good review papers, and it's not necessary the person to have, let's say, 30 years of experience within the field in order to write a good review paper. So I'm an editor-in-chief of a journal. I haven't counted, but probably we have published more than 20 review papers for the 14 years of existence of the journal. And some of these, they were written by PhD students. So if you want to submit such a review paper, EJTR is open for you.
All right. And I would also add one thing here is that most of the journals also invite some experienced researchers because there's a huge readership for those researchers. So it's not that the journal editors do not believe in younger researchers or anything like this, but sometimes by invitation because of the readership that comes with experienced researchers. However, I would say something. Recently, I got an email from Professor Fevzi, who asked me to write a paper, but then he told me that you are free to invite whoever you want. So this is important again to talk to your supervisors, because if your supervisor is one of those people who are very experienced in the field, and if they get an invitation, if you have already talked to your supervisor that I'm willing to work on a review paper, it's highly possible that your supervisor is going to invite you with them to work on that review paper. So please be open with your supervisors, or sometimes you can also be open with other faculty members in your department, in your college. I mean, to me, and I'm pretty sure, Stan, you have also seen students who are so brilliant that not only they work with their supervisors, but they're willing to work on multiple other things. So in that type of case, talk to faculty members in your college, in your department. You go to conferences, get out of your comfort zone. Don't sit with people who you go with. I mean, you are already with them all the time. Talk to people other than your own group. Talk to them about your expertise, your interests. And I'm pretty sure that people are going to invite you accordingly. All the people that I know, including Stan, it's based on my work during my PhD times. Like Stan was never my PhD supervisor, but we just got in touch with each other through, papers and working together and stuff like this. In fact, I want to share one very interesting story. I have a very, very good friend called Kisan Ru. He is from Korea, South Korea. And he is such a wonderful chap. When I was studying for PhDs, and his papers were the pioneer papers in physical environment, and I read a lot of his papers. And it just happens that I sent him an email saying that, look, I read your papers, these are so good, and I really like your writing style, and I hope someday I can work with you. And then the next day, his email came back to me and said, like, why someday? Why not work now? And that was something very surprising to me, because I never thought like this. And now me and Kisan have close to 10 papers together, including some of the papers that are award-winning papers. So it's always not only what the editors do, but also what you do on your part as a student, as a PhD student. Okay, so let's go further. Let's see, there's another paper. Okay, so Stan, there's another question for you from John Paulo. In your journal, what are the typically accepted research papers in terms of research design? Are mostly accepting qualitative papers, quantitative, or mixed methods?
Practically, we have published all three types: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. It depends, because we don't have any preference towards the methodology, as long as the methodology is relevant for achieving the aim and objectives of the research and answering the research questions.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much about that. And again, I would reiterate what you are saying. It really depends on your contribution. And then also, it's not, I mean, obviously it's about methodology, but it's also about if that's the right methodology for what your question was, right? I normally ask this question in my research methods class, like, what do you think about hammer? Is it a good tool or a bad tool? And people are very confused about it, right? So, I mean, if you want to, you know, put a nail into a wall, hammer is a good tool. But if you want to bang your own finger with a hammer, it's not a very good tool to do that, right? So methodology is, you know, informed by your research question. As far as you are doing the right methods, I think any journal would be okay with that. Any editor would be okay with that. All right. So now there are a couple of other questions which are again specific to research. And I think that these are questions that normally you would hear from PhD students as well. So this question says that as a first year PhD student, what is most important for me, to read or to write?
Yeah, that's very interesting question. My short answer will be that before writing, first you have to read. And a longer response will be that definitely reading. The PhD student should invest a lot of time in reading during the first year, but also writing should not be but also should spend some time writing. Probably a review paper may come from reading all these papers for the PhD, or probably participating in a conference with a paper based on the topic of the thesis, in order to receive a feedback from other people. What you said, to go outside of the comfort zone, outside of the circle of acquaintances, and to see and to receive feedback from other people. So definitely reading, but also writing.
Right, and I agree to you. While you are reading as a first year PhD student, most of that reading is going towards your literature review. And it's a very good idea. If you are doing a good job there, you can take out not only one, but multiple papers from your literature review. In fact, yesterday, I reviewed one of my very close friends. She was not my PhD student, but a good friend. She sent me her literature review, which is close to 80 pages. And we were discussing on how to take out 2 papers from it, because the literature is so extensive with bibliometrics, with network analysis, and with multiple topical trends and stuff like this. So if you are reading, it would inform your writing as well. As far as if, let's say, you're working on something that does not have very detailed literature review or something, how can you do that? I think you can write informed by reading. So my own PhD supervisor, Dr. Muslim Amin, when I started my PhD, he told me to stop doing 3 things and to start doing 3 things. And I was like, okay, what should I start doing? What should I stop doing? Then he said that, okay, you should stop socializing, you should stop entertainment, and you should stop enjoying for the first year of your PhD. And I was very shocked, because I like to do all those things. So then I thought, okay, let me ask him, what should I start doing? Because probably he's going to say something nice about what should I start doing. And he went like, start reading, and start reading. So you just have to read. And I would tell you that his suggestion has helped me immensely, because that reading for the first 6 to 8 months, literally I have read, it helped me so much in understanding the literature and understanding where are the gaps, what are the things that need to be focused on. And by the time I finished my PhD, I had 11 publications, and in pretty good journals, not pretty decent journals, including EJ, European Journal of Tourism Research. So reading is very important, but the moment you understand your reading, start writing as well. Don't waste your time on writing. Okay. Now there are some other questions, Stan, more questions coming, I will see. Okay, so there's a question saying, thank you for taking your time to discuss this very interesting topic. I have a very specific question regarding how we choose the journal we want to publish. So there are 2 questions here. Do we first write the article in full and then choose the journal, or we have the journal in mind while writing the paper?
Well, Very interesting, because when I write, I always face this. Usually what I do is it depends on the case. Most often I first write and then choose where it will be, because usually one paper will fit not in only one journal, but probably 5, 10, even 20 possible outlets. But of course, sometimes you need to concentrate on a particular journal, because probably there's a special issue, there's a call for special issue, or probably the topic is such that it fits perfectly within the scope of the journal, or probably the length. My main problem, for example, now with some of my papers is that they often exceed 10,000 words, including the references. And there are only a handful of journals which publish papers above 10,000 words, including DGATR, but as editor-in-chief, I don't publish in the journal research papers. So this limits the scope. So I have to think also about the journal. But generally, yes, it's good to have first the paper, then think about the journal, because otherwise you become very focused on the journal and on journal level metrics, rather than on the content itself, on the research itself. Mm-hmm. And I think the research itself, the contribution, the methodology, they are more important than the actual outlet when at the end the paper will be published.
Okay, thank you. So this question was from Nick Nomov. I hope the name is correct.
Yes, we know each other quite well.
Okay, so the second question is, and this is a very good question, because I have seen this not as a question, but as a recommendation from very seasoned researchers to young researchers. I particularly do not agree, but let me see, what do you think about this? Is it better to aim for a more reputable journal, and if rejected, get to a lower tier one, or vice versa?
Well, again, there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off between speed and height. If we consider height as the ranking of the journal, and speed, how much time will it take until the paper is out? Nice. So, and it all depends on the topic. So if your topic requires speed, so it means that it's better to be out, let's say, in 2, 3, 5 months. Then probably it would be best to go to another journal. Mm-hmm. If your topic requires will be valid when speed is not essential, then you can go to that journal. Then because the probability of acceptance will be very low, less than 10%, regardless of the paper might be outstanding, but because there will be also outstanding papers, there's a very high probability that the paper is rejected. Probably you'll go to another one and another one, and after the paper is published, it may turn out that already a year and a half or 2 years passed. So it's a trade-off between these. And also, not always the top, the highest ranked journals are the most relevant for your for the paper, because it may turn out that there are other journals which are, because of their scope, because of their readership, because of the methodologies that are published there, they're more relevant. So again, it depends on the topic. Usually, this is the strategy, starting from highest ranked and then going down. But I usually apply the other strategy, taking into consideration height and speed.
All right. Thank you, Stan. Now, there's another question. This is, again, a very interesting question. Let's see what you think about it. With the pandemic we are experiencing right now, do you think it's important to come up with a study now on the impact of COVID-19 on tourism or any other industry, or come up with a study later after the pandemic is over?
Practically here, it all depends again on the speed of publishing, because if we make the study now and the paper is published in May 2021, practically the findings might be irrelevant. If we're talking about an empirical paper, so if we talk about a conceptual paper, that might not be such an issue. But if we rely on if we make an empirical paper, let's say related to forecasting, or what was the impact on tourists or willingness to travel after the pandemic, etc., then probably we can make it now and try to and submit it.
Okay. I actually, about this one, I've got a couple of interesting observations. I saw on Facebook some people sharing that it's a good idea to do research on COVID-19, but then I also see that a lot of people are criticizing it. They're saying like, wow, this is now a new thing for people to just get something published. I think what you say makes sense. And I think we should get the both. I mean, we should be in the middle somewhere. We shouldn't go to either of the extremes. Yes, I mean, if you are only adding COVID-19 to the title of your paper, the paper is not really doing anything interesting, I don't think this is a good idea. Just because you feel that it's going to be published very soon because I'm talking about COVID-19. But on the other hand, if you are doing a research that is relevant in regards to COVID-19, why not? I mean, why not? Like, that's what we do, right? That's what research is about, to inform people about your findings, anything that is relevant to us. So very interesting. Thank you, Stan, about this. Let's look into a couple of other questions. So there's a question that says that when we are trying to identify gaps, number one, how many gaps are good enough for a PhD thesis? Second one, what is the best part of a paper to read in order to find the gap?
So the question was how many gaps or how many,
So,
practical?
Yeah, so the one is like, normally when we say you should identify a gap and write a paper or write your thesis based on a gap, how many gaps are sufficient for a PhD thesis or dissertation? And then when trying to identify gap, which parts of the research paper should I focus on?
Okay, I understand now. Well, the more the gaps, the greater the contribution of the thesis. So this is good. The more the better. However, the more the gaps, the more difficult to write the thesis, because practically the PhD student will need to make several researches in order to fill in each of these gaps. So also it all depends on the size of the gap and how easily such a gap can be filled in. So if we're talking about, let's say, the moderation effect of something on something else, on an existing theory, then probably it could be filled easier than if we need to develop a completely new methodology on measuring, let's say, the impacts of tourism on something. So again, there's no recipe. There's no recipe. It will come from reading. For example, if you are talking about if you make research on my favorite topic, automation and robotics in tourism, then definitely after reading 30-40 papers, it will be very easy to identify at least 20-30 gaps in the literature. Easily. Each of them can be transformed into a separate PhD thesis. Some of the gaps, well, of course, some of the gaps will be very broad and they will require probably not one thesis. Others can be easily, they will be within one and the same domain, and it will be easy to, and more the better, but it will be more difficult to write the thesis.
Thank you very much, Stan. So I completely agree to what you are saying.
And the second question, I think I didn't answer the second question. Yes, about which part. Well, definitely the paper has to be read from the title until the last word of the paper. This is the best. But at one point, after reading, let's say 30, 40, 50 papers, on a particular topic, there's a saturation rate. There's a saturation that is achieved. So the new papers that will come, they will have very little difference in terms of literature review. So at that point, you can easily identify the gaps that these papers fill in by looking at the eminent objectives, the methodology, and the key findings. And but of course, and if these sections attract your attention, then move on.
Okay, thank you very much, Stan.
Hey guys, if you think you are getting some value out of this video, please do not forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. I would also appreciate if you can share this video within your social networks or within your networks of people that may need this video. Going back.
Now, there's another thing here which is very interesting, and that is again related to COVID-19, but it's a very good question because it can be applied into many other cases. So this is a question from Ambalika. I hope the name is pronounced correctly. I'm a second-year PhD student. My study is on analysis of tourism industry in Northeast India. Now that the tourism industry has been affected a lot because of the pandemic, is it advisable to change or add an objective to my study?
Adding an objective could be a good solution. Adding an objective would be a good solution.
Would be a good solution, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we have another question that says that does the journal reputation rely heavily on tiers? For example, most researchers are very much concerned on Scopus index journals and cohort Q1 and Q2. Does it mean if the journal is classified as Q4, it is really less reputable as compared with those in Q1?
Well, we can talk for ages on this one, because what I personally consider is whether the journal is indexed in Scopus and Web of Science, not what's the impact factor and what is whether it is Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Because we need to consider how the impact factor and how site score are calculated. So these quartiles, the ranking of the journals is based on the average citations of articles. So it's not based on the contribution of article, how it is developing the field, or the novelty of methodology, etc. It's based purely on citations. So if the journal publishes articles in a field which is very popular, then the journal will attract more citations, and this may increase the site score. If the journal focuses on niche topics where you have, let's say, 20, 30, 50 people in the world writing on, probably you will not have sufficient number of papers citing these papers. So the journal will have a lower rating. So I know that publishing in a journal with in Q1 and with very high impact factor, it's good for it's good for the ego, but this doesn't change the quality of the paper. The quality of the paper will be exactly the same if it is published in Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4 journal. And what I observe a lot, and this is also something that I mentioned on my post on TriNet a couple of days ago, is that we have a halo effect. So often we think about the quality of an article by the ranking of the journal where it is published, but it is the opposite. The journal quality depends on the quality of the articles that are published there. Okay.
Yes, I completely agree to this. In fact, I tell sometimes people that, you know, this Q1, Q2, and this is depending on the impact factor or citations that a journal is getting. Sometimes it's highly possible that the journal is getting citations just because of a few papers that were published a few years ago. So, you know, now, in fact, there's a question, somebody is asking about H index and I-10 index, which is a relevant question because many people now, if you are applying for a job, in fact, when I applied for green card, they asked me this question, which is not an academic thing. I mean, green card is nothing to do with academics,
Mhm.
but they still ask me this question that you are a researcher, you are a professor, whatever, then tell me about the impact of your research. So many people are now moving towards the individual impact that you as a researcher are making, which is beyond the impact factor of the journals where you are publishing, which includes I-10, H-index, you know, all those type of things.
Yes.
Stan, can you give us a little bit insight on what is H-index and I-10 index?
The H-index, this is the H-index of N means that you have N papers that can be cited at least N times.
Right.
Yeah, so so it means that when your index increases, it means that you have more papers, which is the quantitative measure, the number of publications, but also the citations to these papers increase, which is the again quantitative, but it can quantitative measure of the citation. So it is a bit transformed into a qualitative measure of the impact of your research.
Yeah, let me share my screen very quickly. I'll
Yes.
just explain this very quick because some people may not have got it. Okay, can everybody please mute their mics? It's very important. Okay, so this is my Google Scholar page, right? So obviously citations are one measure of looking at how much impact your work is making, but H-index is 23, which means that if I put all my papers from the highest cited paper to the least cited paper, 23 means that 23 of my papers have 23 or more than 23 citations. So the more H-index means the more of your papers are making impact. I-10 index simply means every time a paper of you get more than 10 citations, then it's included in I-10. So what it means right now is that 33 of my papers have received at least 10 citations. And then if I go down all the way down here, this is my 23rd paper, which has 23 citations. So the moment this paper gets 24 citations, then my H-index would become 24. And then here, I have like a bunch of papers that have 9 citations. So the moment I get one more citation for them, my I-10 index would increase. So that's simply what it means.
Yeah.
But again, this is one measure of showing your impact as an individual researcher, not the impact of the journal where you are publishing.
Exactly.
Okay, so that was good. Now, one other question, and this is again probably a controversial question, but it's a good question. Is it true that publishing of a paper depends on the university where you are affiliated with or the supervisor? Plus, I will also add something here. I go to many developing countries to conduct workshops and talk to students, and I've seen this. There is a perception that if in your paper you invite a professor from a developed country, mainly US, UK, Australia, Canada, then the chances of you getting published increases a lot. What do you think about this?
Well, it depends on the ethics of the editor. If the editor is an ethical person, then this is absolutely not the case, because the editors should rely on the quality of the paper, on the methodological rigor, on the theoretical contribution, practical implications and contribution of the paper, novelty, etc., and how well it is written, etc. Not where the person comes from, not the nationality, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or anything of the author. So it's
okay.
This is my answer. At least in the EJTR, these are not criteria that are considered.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, most of the editors that I know are very ethical, and I think this is very good that you bring this point. It's an ethical point of view. Ethically, it's not correct, and if you are an ethical editor, it shouldn't matter where you are from, paper, this, that. In fact, recently Elsewhere published a research report where they said that the upcoming major countries where the research is being published is Pakistan, and there was, if I'm not wrong, it was either Syria or Egypt. I guess it was Egypt, if I'm not wrong, which actually talks to exactly what you are saying, that many people have perceptions or stereotypes saying that, okay, I'm from this country, if I submit my paper, maybe it's rejected. I think you should do it instead of thinking about it. Just submit your paper. Don't think too much about it, negativity. Because yes, unfortunately, sometimes this type of things happen, but most of the times, people are very ethical. You know, there's a reason why somebody is an editor of a journal. So, okay, very interesting. All right, then one other, well, we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So we can do that. And let's see, there's another question, and that says that how do we connect conceptual and theoretical framework, if there's a difference between both of them?
How do we connect
So
conceptual?
first, right, is there a difference between conceptual and theoretical framework? If yes, how do we connect them?
Yeah, so yeah, this is fantastic question. Practically, we can develop a conceptual framework for anything, because it is how different concepts are related to each other. But theoretical framework means that there are relationships between these concepts that have been tested and are considered generally valid within and considered true and supported. So yeah, practically from a conceptual framework, when you test, from a conceptual framework, you can develop a theoretical framework and to test it.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Stan, there. I also shared a link of a video in the chat that I did recently about literature map, mind map, theoretical framework, conceptual framework. So maybe you can watch it. All right. So another question is, how many papers can we publish with the same concept by experimenting on different data sets?
Well, depends on the topic, depends on the concept, depends on the data set and that you have, and depends on ethical issues. So if you enter into, if you apply a blue ocean strategy and to enter into a field where you have few, if any, publications, or very few publications, then it's possible to experiment and to test, to write different papers on the same concept and to see which works, which doesn't work, and with different methodologies and in different empirical contexts. However, you have to be very careful in order not to fall into paper slicing, which means writing writing practically the same papers, replicating absolutely the same research, just with different context. Let's say one and the same questionnaire, respondents from Bulgaria, the next one, the respondents from Pakistan, respondents from the US, etc., where everything is absolutely the same and the concept is, and the whole method, when everything is the same. This is paper slicing, because it might be, although this might be considered at one point paper slicing, there needs to be some improvement on basis on the previous methodology. At least this is my perspective. But if you enter a new field like, let's say, robots in tourism, I don't know why I mentioned this topic, but if you enter this field and you start writing, let's say, about attitudes towards robots or willingness to pay for robot delivered services or anything there, it is possible to write several papers on the same topic with probably slightly different, with different methodologies, experimenting with different models and also with different contexts, because practically the field is not written yet. And with this and with your research, you will establish the field.
Right, which is, I guess, what you also did with your robotics study, where you did a global study, collected data from I don't know how many nationalities. How many languages did you translate your survey?
Yeah, the survey was available in 12 languages. We had slightly less than 1,700 respondents who completed everything, 100%, and from 103 countries.
Right. Now, again, I want to focus on something here, which you said that, you know, it's not always a good idea to just say that it's a new context and that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
It's possible. I mean, you can do it as far as you are explaining why that context is so different, why that context warrants a new study, right? So your explanation, your focus should be on the context. And in fact,
Yes.
you know, I was, last night I was reviewing one paper which was saying that we have done this study, we have picked up this one model and we have tested it in Pakistan, which is a new context.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the contribution is. So my question, even in the review, was that how does it make it a contribution when you don't even talk about what's so special about Pakistan? So talk about Pakistan, write a page about Pakistan, what's special, what is different in Pakistan that is not in the existing research. And then you can make your study as a contributing study, because then people would understand, okay, this is a new context. And that, one good example of this would be, right now we have people from different countries. I see that we have people from, obviously from Bulgaria, we have some from India, we have from South Korea, from Pakistan. So quite a bunch of people from different places. I normally personally do not agree to generational cohorts, because I don't think that every person who is a millennial is the same person or with the same characteristics or same things,
Sure.
right? So I think if you are, let's say you pick up a study, and I think Stan, you did one study on Russian adults and robots, right?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
So if I have to exactly pick up that study and replicate it in Pakistan, I really need to discuss what's the difference between Russian adults and Pakistani adults. Only then I can say that it's a contribution. If there is some very stark differences, I mean, that's where you as a researcher need to come in and really dig deeper and understand what the differences are. Okay, very interesting. Let's see, we have two more questions. All right, so one is, how many interviews are necessary when we are dealing with qualitative analysis?
Well, for qualitative analysis, depends on data saturation and depends on population size. So if, for example, you are you're making research about, let's say, mobile phone operators in Bulgaria, and you want to interview the CEOs, obviously there are only 3. So you cannot have more than 3 interviews, but it would be best to have all 3. But if your population size is much larger than this, then at one point, I suppose somewhere between 15, 20, there will be a saturation point reached. But it all depends on the topic. It depends on the diversity of the respondents. Depends on the diversity of the population itself and the sample. And then when such saturation point in the responses is achieved, probably you can have, let's say, 2, 3, 4 more interviews just as an assurance that there's no new topic, no new new information that is received through these interviews, and then you can stop.
Right.
But obviously 100 interviews, they seem too many.
Right. The saturation point, extremely important. I mean, interviews are sometimes difficult, especially if you are doing hour-long interviews. Oh. I don't know who is talking, but it's okay. So, yeah, I think interviews are very good because it's qualitative data, but interviews are complicated, difficult, especially if you're going for hour-long interviews or sometimes even 1.5, 2 hours long. Saturation point should be your, what you're saying is that it's important that you understand the saturation point, because the moment you achieve the saturation, the moment you understand that you are getting repeated information, then you should stop there and start with your analysis. All right, one other question, last question, I think that would be, is it true that if we use the most recent methodological techniques, the chances of publishing of paper becomes higher?
The choice of the methodology depends on the aim and objectives, the research questions, and the relevance. Whether they are relevant for the research or not whether it is how novel it is. So you may use a methodology developed 50 years ago, and because it is still valid. If new methodology shows that the previous one was not relevant, it's not relevant anymore, and there's something new which is much better, then use the new one.
Okay.
So this is my answer.
All right. Thank you, Stan. Last question. That is my question from you, because we are already over time. You were studying for your PhD in 2002, 3, 4, around that time?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Okay. If right now you have to go back and give yourself 3 important tips, what would those be?
So if I look 18 years back and to tell to my younger self what to do, well, I would say that, better time management. This is important. Probably to invest a bit more in research methodologies, and also socialize more with people. Yeah, because it's a PhD, and but this doesn't mean that we should be like in a quarantine. Networking, participating in conferences, reading not only academic papers but also trade press publications, because trade press publications, they can be wonderful sources of ideas. Keeping notebooks of ideas and trying to make things done, better done. You know, it's people don't remember the thinkers, people remember the doers. So things have to be done at the end.
Right. Thank you very much, Stan. I really appreciate your time. I know you are busy, so I really appreciate your time, and I'm pretty sure that everybody who has listened and who are going to listen in the future, because I'll upload this video on YouTube, will appreciate your insight on all these questions. I think most of the questions were very interesting because they were coming from PhD students. So I think that a lot of important things were discussed here. Some questions, obviously, because of the time, I couldn't ask. However, what I'll do is I'm going to note down these questions, and I'll continue to do these type of things. I'll invite Stan again, maybe some other people, probably every week, just so that, you know, people have a proper support system. Of course, this is not like your own supervisor, your own family members, but we are trying to help as much as possible. And you can see right now we have people from pretty much a lot of different places. Which is a good thing, which is really a good thing. It's like a sense of community. So for those of you who are here, I appreciate your time. Please make sure you follow on Facebook. Stan is also on Facebook. You can follow him also. And if you're working on tourism, you can submit your papers to European Journal of Tourism Research. Just make sure there's no plagiarism, because Stan is very, very strict on plagiarism.
Yes, no more.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Faizan, and thank you everyone for participating and for the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.